Hey everybody, welcome to Rock and Roll Shin-Soo, the podcast about baseball and rock and roll. Tonight, episode number 59, we're going to take you to 1976. The 70s was a decade of dynasties. The Oakland A's won 3 championships, while the Yankees won 2. Sandwiched in between was the Cincinnati Reds and the Big Red Machine, winning the 75 and 76 series, led by 1976 MVP second baseman Joe Morgan, along with George Foster, Pete Rose, and future Hall of Famers Johnny Bench and Tony Perez. 1976 will also be a year of saves that went beyond Eastwick and Lyle. A last-minute buyer will save the San Francisco Giants from moving to Toronto. Rick Monday will save a flag from burning, and an emergency operation will save a Dodger catcher's life. Hank Aaron will hit his 755th and final home run, while El Presidente, Dennis Martinez, will notch the first of his 245 career wins. And, of course, the other major dynasty of the 1970s, of course, was prog rock. That in mind, I want to introduce our special guest tonight. We've got our friend John White from Kansas City. How are you, John?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Great.
Hello.
John's a great musician and just an all-around encyclopedic knowledge of music. So we're glad to have you, John. Thanks for sitting in with us, buddy.
Oh, absolutely. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and again, my name is Gabe Estel, and I'm here with my co-hosts Dennis Levi Leach and Jonathan Getz. Let's just dive right into music, guys. You know, I was talking to John and Jonathan Levi before you logged on, and you know this is the third year that we've profiled in music and baseball, and the other two, 86 and 96. I felt like with 1986, there were more good albums maybe than we anticipated, than we had remembered, right? You know, once we look back
definitely.
on them.
Yeah.
And then in 1996, I was, and this is somewhat true for you guys as well. I was in high school, John, so I was into older music so much that, like, aside from just a handful of bands, I was kind of ignoring popular music in 1996, at least a lot of it.
Right.
So, you know, we didn't necessarily have, as big as of a pool to pull from, you know, in 1996. 1976. I mean,
oh yeah, this is the
you
wheelhouse.
guys in the mood for a 9-hour podcast?
Yes,
we could.
This is the bread and butter, right?
Yeah,
here.
we've got a lot of ground to cover, and you know, one of the things before we start sharing a couple of our favorite albums, 1976 was kind of the year. It was a really important year for prog rock, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. You know, a lot of people, I think, see 1976, a lot of like maybe traditional rock music fans, as kind of the beginning of the end of a lot of iconic records from like the titans of classic rock. You know, I think in a lot of people's eyes, disco kind of tainted popular music for the rest of the decade. But, you know, as I was looking around 1976, I think there are just a ton of outstanding non-disco albums. You know, I mean, disco certainly ruled the pop charts during those years, you know, 1976 and kind of until the end of the decade, but people were still making great start to finish albums. So why don't we share some of ours here? Guys, we've got a special guest, John, tonight. John, I think you were the only one of us actually alive in 1976. So you've got a little bit of firsthand experience that we don't have, but do you mind telling us kind of what albums stand out to you from 76?
From that time, some of the stuff that I was listening to, I remember the Frampton Comes Alive came out and it was just huge. You know, I mean, that's a great album. The Heart's debut album, Dreamboat Annie, was huge. For me, like Rush's 2112 is, is a classic, and also their All the World's a Stage came out later in the year too, which was actually the first album that I owned by them. So it's still one of my favorites of theirs. So, and then looking back, Van de Graaff Generators Still Life album, which I wasn't into them at that time. You know, 11 years old, I think they would probably be pretty scary band to listen to. But
a little dark.
They're one of my favorite albums now. You know,
worried about it. He's listening to Van der Graaf Generator.
It's a really good
counselor
album.
Talks to the parents. Yeah, right.
It would be it would be a tough first foray into prog. If that was your first record you got, you would be like, wow.
Hard.
Well, you know, like Roundabout by Yes and stuff was on the radio, was considered to be pretty normal. So
Yeah.
That's
A
true.
lot more accessible prog, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Styx, you know, was big. Crystal Ball came out in '76, I think. So,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Manfred Mann's Earth Band, The Roaring Silence, which had some Bruce Springsteen covers on
Yeah.
it.
Definitely had some hits.
Done in a
on
much
the
different
radio.
style.
Yeah.
Jeff Beck's Wired, which
Great
was
record.
yeah, I think that was like the first solo album actually that I heard of his, and was just blown away by his playing, you know. So, and you know, like Hotel California came out later in that year too, which
Yeah.
was pretty amazing. Yeah, I know I had forgotten that was that year too. But what else did we talk about? Queen's Day at the Races,
Oh, yeah.
which isn't quite as strong as maybe Night at the Opera, but still has some really great songs on it. You Tie Your Mother Down,
Yeah.
Somebody to Love.
Production on that is solid. It sounds great. Like,
It's Roy Thomas Baker, right? Yeah.
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds
right.
like it
Good
was.
stuff.
It was. It could have been recorded. Not that it means anything. It could have been recorded last month. Basically, it sounds timeless.
Yeah, yeah.
He was such a good producer. Him and Bob Ezrin, really the producers of the 70s, like a couple of them at least.
Yeah, well, yeah, like Alice Cooper's Goes to Hell album from that year too, which Ezra. So, Rainbow's Rising album. I think.
Yeah.
So,
I saw a rainbow shirt the other day. I was wearing one in Lawrence. Yeah. Whoa.
It was kind of that was 1976 would have been the post Deep Purple era we were entering, because you had Rainbow come out right in 76. Right. Tommy Bolin died in 76, I believe.
Sad.
Was it 76?
Yeah, I believe he did.
Because Private Eyes came out in 76.
Yeah, I believe he died in 76 still. Yeah, near the end of the year, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He died December 4th, 76.
Yeah. John, some of the albums you mentioned, and then we talked about prog earlier, and then you mentioned some more popular records too. To me, it seems like 1976 was kind of a year where prog and Levi touched on this a little bit, became a little bit more accessible. There was kind of like, you had the first Boston record come out in 1976, which, it's maybe it's not an Emerson, Lake and Palmer or a Vandergraaf Generator record, but there are elements of progressive music on Boston's record.
Yeah.
Sure.
Use of the keyboards.
The beginning of Foreplay. Right. And then also you've got, you mentioned Styx, Crystal Ball, Kansas, Leftoverture, right? Came out in 76, I believe.
Which is, that's to me the epitome of a good blend of kind of progressive music with more popular radio-friendly music.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the stuff was complex, but it was all on the radio. I mean, you heard all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So yeah, it seems like to me that, prog's kind of moment in the popular spotlight was high still, but it was becoming a little bit different, like you could see it kind of moving to a little bit more of a radio friendly, accessible, kind of maybe shorter songs, kind of maybe somewhat more tightly crafted if that's what you're into.
Yeah.
I just saw that as kind of a trend emerging in 76. And then also I think another important thing with 1976, you've got the first Genesis record without Peter Gabriel as well.
Right. Two of them.
Trick of the Tail, which I think is an outstanding record. Genesis was kind of going through a transitional period. But they still, and some people think that, Trick of the Tail was sort of, I don't know, you could sort of hear Gabriel's influence on it a little bit. Collins maybe wasn't quite sure how to sort of, get from
they were still
the drum
using
kit somewhat.
They were still using the same formula. Yeah.
They still kind of were using the same formula. Yeah. Things didn't really take a really sharp left turn really until like and then there were 3. And
right after Steve
special.
Hackett left is when they really started to go in the direction that they ended up going.
Yeah, and which I've learned to appreciate as I get older. That transition that they made, I think. I think
Duke and Abacab are both still great albums, I think.
Oh yeah, I think everything up until Invisible Touch, I can pretty
Yeah,
much,
well, right.
I mean, I like
on the self-titled album.
Yeah, I like the self-titled record too. So,
Sure.
Yeah, I'm kind of an all-era Genesis fan now. I'm not afraid to admit it.
It's amazing how much Genesis comes up in all of these episodes.
We have really talked about them quite a bit. But yeah, so those stand out to me. And then lastly, I'm sorry, I'll pass it over to Jonathan and Levi. John, I don't know if I ever told you this. I'm a huge Kiss fan. All right, and 1976 was kind of the year Kiss really took over the world.
Right.
A lot. Kiss is one of those bands that kind of like Frampton, like you had mentioned, and I think a couple of years later, if you look at Cheap Trick with Budokan, their live album really put them on the map more than their studio work. With Kiss, it was alive.
That was the first album I ever bought with my own money, as a matter of fact.
Really? Nice.
Yeah.
Well done. And then in 1976, by the time Alive had really taken off, Kiss kind of went from openers to being headliners right around 75, 76. And next thing you know, by the end of 1976, early 77, there's a Gallup poll, and Kiss is the biggest band, the most popular band in the world. At least for a brief time. So Kiss put out 2 records, actually, in 76. Destroyer, which was produced by Bob Ezrin, who I mentioned earlier.
That sounds awesome. That album
Destroyer?
stands up as well. The production on it sounds great.
Yeah, production-wise, it's great. Jonathan, I think parts of Destroyer, from what I read at the time, I don't know if necessarily they were divisive, but, the songs are they're not as raw, as the first 3 Kiss records. Mm-hmm. And please, guys, stop me if I just start talking about Kiss all the time. The first 3 Kiss records are kind of like, sort of like, New York Dolls, but instead of in blush, they're in kabuki makeup. You know what I mean? and I mean, that's what they sound like. They've got a really raw sound. And then Destroyer comes around, because they're a big band, and Destroyer's more ambitious. Obviously, Jonathan mentioned the production value is much more sophisticated and complex than those first 3 records. Destroyer is probably Kiss's most famous studio record, and it's the first Kiss CD I got. But I don't know if it's my favorite album by them, just because I like Kiss to rip, and there's a couple, sort of like you could tell it was just
Great Expectations.
Yeah, Great Expectations. Right? You could tell that was just Gene, like, I think we can do anything, what I mean? And maybe that's not the case. And Ace was just like, whatever, Gene, So yeah, Kiss 76 was huge for Kiss, huge. I mean, they everybody was into. I mean, everybody knew who they were by then. 1976. Oh, yeah. Parents and grandparents and kids, everybody knew Kiss. So 76 stands out to me as the year of Kiss, but also some of the other albums I mentioned too.
Yeah, and admittedly, when I say that I think it sounds awesome. I'm not a big Kiss listener, so I came into it pretty cold listening to that album, and so that's the perspective that I have with that. Yeah,
they brought. They brought Ezrin in, and they busted out the big guns there.
It was kind of,
and backup singers and all that.
This album was later, but it was kind of like their Pyromania. Like Def Leppard had kind of put out some records that weren't as polished, and then it was like they threw all the money on the production and came out with that.
Mutt Lang in,
Right. But to me, 76, and it's all about the live records. John mentioned the Live Rush record that year. Well, 2 of the live records that came out that year, I wore out CDs of. One was Bob Seger's Live Bullet, and the other was Lynyrd Skynyrd's One from the Road.
Right.
One from the Road is 76. Yeah.
And so, man, those 2 live records, I think, I don't know, just I've worn out copies of each of them on vinyl and CD. And at that time, like in the mid 90s, late 90s, when I got my first copy of One from the Road on CD, it was, I think, the first live Skynyrd I think I'd ever heard, really, because this, the internet wasn't as big, YouTube wasn't as big. They didn't have out now all the different live releases, bootleg series that they've done and all that. And so to hear some of those Skynyrd songs live was just awesome. I still think that's the definitive version of Whiskey Rock and Roller off of One More from the Road, for sure.
Right on.
I got that album from the Columbia House Record Club or whatever.
Nice.
It's one of those kind of.
Nice.
Oh, you got to take a drink every time you say Columbia House.
There you go.
New game.
Nice.
Got water.
Nice.
I learned to play a lot of guitar playing along with that album.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Right on.
You had Steve Gaines in the band too, who really, in my opinion, was
amazing.
Was the missing piece that Skynyrd. I mean, granted they had worked with 3 guitarists before, but I don't think with anyone quite as talented as him.
Yeah,
and on
our best.
Oh yeah, and on the other side of it, with the Bob Seger record, just the combination of Travelin' Man and A Beautiful Loser, it's just like amazing. That song I have heard probably thousands of times, and if it's still on the radio, I turn it up if I'm there. I don't know why. I've always loved it.
It's the staying power of a song. Yeah.
Yep. Right on. For me, it was interesting that it did take me a while to realize, or it took me a while to get into albums from '76. Like, it really didn't happen until college. Other than like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, that album, self-titled album, right. Kind of obvious ones like that. But then in college, where most kids are, turned on to experimental guitars, like, not so experimental, but Tommy Bolin. Tommy Bolin's Private Eyes that we mentioned earlier, is just blew me away from Bustin' Out for Rosie and Post Toasty, man.
Oh,
and
yeah.
just to hear those, and it's not just about the guitars with Bolin either. It's just like the sax incorporated into it. And that was when I learned that sax could be done tastefully and still, true to the spirit of rock and roll, and not, it doesn't necessarily denote cheese, which is often the case in the 80s and early 90s. And I assume for all of us, it's a pretty big album.
Oh yeah, great record.
And as well, when I heard this album turned me on to this band ZZ Top's Tejas. Hearing El Diablo just blew me out of the water. That da 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 da. I was like, I need to own this album, and snagged it at Recycle, Levi. And
nice.
The production and the guitars on that, I think, are classic Top. Can't go wrong with that one. That one's my quintessential Top record.
That's before they started going kind of cheesy with their stuff.
Exactly.
Too,
Exactly.
Yeah, for the
it all went downhill. Went down. I don't know if downhill, because I like some of their cheesy songs, but
I do too.
Yeah, like El Loco is kind of when they started to.
Right.
It became a little less bluesy. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
synthesizer cranking those up. Yeah. Well, Jonathan had touched on a couple of the albums that he got into later in 19. Like
it's 2000s.
Wasn't into them in high
2000s.
school. Yeah. Right. I mean, because I mentioned Kiss in Boston, and I listened to the hell out of those. When I was a teenager.
Real quick, Betsy and I, we put on the Boston album, and we're like, okay, we've never listened to this album, and then we realized 8 songs in, we have heard this album on FM radio.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, that's what hurts that album a little bit, and it's not Boston's fault.
Not at all.
It's just that, I mean, every classic rock radio station, the album's got like 6 singles on it. I mean,
yeah.
Well, he'd been working on that album for years. You know, I mean, crafting all those tunes for literally years before they recorded it. I think. So.
Well,
what's crazy? It was recorded in his basement of his. Of his
no kidding.
He made all those effects. That's like why it was until he came out with that line of Rockman gear. It was really tough to get his tone.
Yeah,
because he had created a bunch of all of his own effects pedals.
Everybody wanted to know what he was using.
Yeah, he still tours with all that stuff. When I worked for Boston a couple years ago, he was still carrying full racks, full like the size of a door racks, 2 of them. Full with all of the stuff, and one of the racks was just for backup. Yeah, it was like a NASA control panel behind him.
He put that MIT education to good use. He went to MIT.
No kidding.
So he was a sharp guy. Still is a sharp guy. So yeah, and he certainly, John's right. He takes his time. There's about those Boston record. Well, except for that Don't Look Back was the one they put out shortly after the first one.
It came out in '78.
Yeah, that one was a little rushed, but their next album, they took 8 years to make. So
they should have taken longer.
Yeah,
took them 8 years to count all the money from the first 2.
Yeah.
And it was interesting how them and ELO fought over the UFO album covers for the 70s.
Right. Oh man,
there's another band that put out an album in '76. ELO had a New World record that year, I believe.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's a good album.
It is.
Yeah,
right before my favorite one of theirs, but.
Which one was that?
Out of the Blue.
Oh, right.
Came out next.
Yeah. Also, guys, kind of, sort of I don't know, I guess maybe you could call it kind of a cousin of prog, because it was certainly progressive jazz. The fusion movement was pretty strong in 1976.
Absolutely.
You got Jacko's first album coming out, right? Or his self-titled album. Chick Corea put out The Leprechaun.
Return to Forever's Romantic Warrior, I think.
Mm-hmm. Return to Forever with Romantic Warrior.
That album is amazing. You talk about.
I have it sitting right next to me. I was just listening to it before.
And I don't have them in front of me. There's a few others I'm probably forgetting, but that was kind of the height of that era.
One of the records that I got into later from that was Pat Metheny's Bright Size Life.
There you go.
That year.
Yep.
And that record is amazing. And then, I've definitely dove way more into the fusion now than I ever had before when I was younger. And another one that I've found out since then, and I have no idea, I'm going to say this guy's name wrong probably, but I think it's Jean-Michel Jarre. I don't know how you say it.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
His album called Oxygen came out that year, and it's really good.
Yeah.
Levi, it was so weird when you mentioned that, because just like a week earlier, I had added his album Equinox to my Apple Music collection.
I have both of those, yeah.
Yeah, and it was the first time I had ever heard of him, first time I listened to it, and then you mentioned him the very next week with that album.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's been probably 30 years since I've heard that album. So.
Really?
Yep.
It's kind of tangerine dreamy, I think, in a way, or something, wasn't it?
It's definitly got some ambient type music,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I felt like I was in like a Jim Henson movie at times, for sure. I literally thought that.
Right.
The cool thing was, that it's really reassuring to hear that challenging music like fusion was really popular. You know what I mean? I mean that's cool. I mean all those bands that those albums that we just mentioned, the Refusion, they all came out on big labels. The bands played big venues.
There was a large portion of listeners that were very discerning.
Yeah. And you could say the same thing with progressive music too.
You know what I mean? They were typically audiophiles. They typically listened to prog exclusively. A lot of them, or. It was a totally different time, and it's awesome that it got to happen, because now
it's kind of unfathomable.
Yeah, looking back, it's like how did that ever happen?
Yeah, how could Emerson, Lake and Palmer
get on the radio?
could get on the radio and like sell out a stadium. You know what I mean? Like, it's not. I mean, it's awesome. Don't get me wrong. That sounds like heaven to me. But like,
yeah, but it pushed him towards Love Beach. You know, so I'm not sure that's a good thing.
Yeah, but 1976, 1977, you had everybody from the stoners to the captain of the cheerleading team were going to an ELP concert. I mean, it was reached such a large audience. It's cool.
Yeah.
One totally stripped down. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this record. It's much different than the ones we've discussed so far. Ry Cooder's Chicken Skin Music is really good. It's like I said, much different than
I got the Bourgeois Blues.
That's right. That's a good one. And I have to admit, that's one that I can't say I was cool enough to have that one in high school.
Yeah, I picked it up on vinyl a couple years ago.
Yeah, I just got into it fairly recently as well.
If I would have showed up at my high school with that, people would have looked at me like I was insane.
But it's great. I mean, it's a much quieter album, than some of those others that we mentioned with the big production values. And then, a really popular record that came out that year as well is Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees.
Oh yeah, great album.
Yeah, went sold like 4 or 5 million copies.
Yeah,
something
the
like
production
that.
on that one is excellent as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I think we're spoiled in the 70s with good production. Like looking back, I think a lot of people thought at the time stuff was too slick. But like as a kid who grew up listening to the production values of like late 90s music, it left a lot to be desired of the 70s, which I enjoy.
Yeah. Well, I think that, there was a lot of attention on the album. The album is how you got heard. The album is, was your vehicle. You know what I mean?
YouTube, it was everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's true.
A lot of work went into it.
Yeah, it was the pinnacle of the album. I think that with I stumbled upon this band called Gasolin, and I've been pushing it for like 2 weeks. Everybody I talk to, like in the grocery store, pumping gas, I'm like Gasolin, and they were a band. They were a Danish band that up to that point had released everything in Dutch, and the Danish speak Dutch, correct?
I
confirm that real quick.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think so. And what they did in 1976, they released this album called What a Lemon, and it's really confusing because it's an album cover that they borrowed from their third record, but it's like their fourth record re-recorded. With English lyrics. And so it's really confusing if you look at their discography. And it took me a while to figure it out. And so they re-recorded this album with all English lyrics, and it sounds awesome. It sounds totally, on par with some of the best 70s rock. And it's Gasolin's What a Lemon. You can find it on YouTube. You can't find it on Apple Music.
No.
You probably won't find it in your local record store.
I listened to the first couple of songs this morning. Yeah, it was pretty good.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun. And they were huge over in Europe, but and they were trying to gain some traction here and didn't really. But I highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. One that then you said Roy Thomas Baker was on that one too, right?
Yeah, Roy Thomas Baker produced it.
Yeah, nice.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, he also worked with a band that I think they put out a record in '76. I think. John, are you familiar with Starcastle?
Yeah, that was their first album came out in '76.
Okay, that's a good record too.
Sure.
They're from actually. I've got another. I like the music, and then also I've got a soft spot for it. They're from Central Illinois.
Right.
So they formed in Champaign.
Well, their singer originally was in REO Speedwagon.
Right. You're right. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah.
And then it was the guy from Head East went on to join Petra. I'm sorry, I couldn't remember.
He became a Christian rock artist too. Terry Littrell, I think.
Right, Terry Littrell. Right. That's it. Yeah. Forgot the guy's name, but they got a hell of a bass player in Starcastle as well. He rips. Yeah, I forgot his name.
Gary Strader.
Yes, that dude's awesome. So.
I just got that off Wikipedia. I confess, I did not pull that.
No, you do it. Yeah, take that.
I mean, Starcastle were definitely, they were certainly Yes acolytes. I don't.
Little.
I don't think like it's the tunes are good. I mean, it's not necessarily going to hold up as the most original album when you look at what was popular during that era. It's like, yeah, you listen to it, you're like, obviously this sounds good. These guys really like Yes a lot, right? I mean, that's, even the voices are similar as well. But that's another good one as well that I'd forgotten.
Yeah, it really is.
And I was thinking, probably the album that most people would consider the best record of that year we haven't mentioned yet. Anybody guess?
Oh, Stevie Wonder.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Songs
don't know.
On the Key of Life.
I'd have to give it. I don't get me wrong. I love the record. I'd have to give it. You know what I mean? I can't really say which one's the best from that year.
Right.
But I think most critics would probably agree that one usually tops most lists for this year.
That thing was number 1 on the Billboard 200 from October 16th through the end of the year.
Yeah.
Wow.
It dethroned Frampton Comes Alive.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, probably, and like after that, he didn't put out that many great albums afterwards. You know what I mean? This was kind of like, it's kind of a swan song, really, as far as really interesting records, I think, that's a big, great record, I mean, it's, definitely he worked hard on that one. I mean,
and it's a testament to the power of the album in 1976.
Yeah.
You compare that, that's a double LP, right? So you compare that and what Boston was able to do.
Yeah.
Man, they didn't fuck around with albums in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely.
They had that shit in order.
Yeah.
Another live soundtrack, actually, that came out was Song Remains the Same, I think, came out at the end of that year, too. So,
right.
Not saying it's a great album by any means, but it did come out that year. So.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel Presence holds up?
Glad you mentioned that.
It's got some cuts, man.
It does, and it opens with just a ripper.
Yeah,
just
that's one of their
right
great songs right there.
Yeah. I like it. Presence isn't the first Zeppelin record that most kids get into. I mean, for me, I have to admit, I didn't really discover Presence until college, just because, you just don't, you pick up 2.
You're hanging around
4.
1 through 4, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you go through, you kind of go through those first, or maybe Houses of the Holy, and then maybe Physical Graffiti, and then kind of in college, I started to appreciate Presence and In Through the Outdoor. Mm-hmm. But I like Presence. Yeah, I mean, it was. If I'm not mistaken, it was recorded really quickly, right? Didn't they bust it out in 2-3 weeks, something like that?
Yeah, it seemed like they just holed up and worked hours and hours every day just to
18 days.
Out.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it. I mean, I think it. I think it's good. I think it deserves a second listen. I mean, it deserves. If you haven't listened to it in a while, it deserves another listen. Do you like it, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think actually it's funny because it's what the Crows and Page did to Nobody's Fault But Mine that really opened my eyes to what a good song that is. Mm-hmm. And because whenever I hear Nobody's Fault But Mine, I actually kind of expect Chris Robinson's vocals on
yeah, it's funny. Yeah, there are certain Zeppelin songs after that Jimmy Page record. I'll hear them and I'll just be like, what version is this? I'm like, wow. It's. You just get used to the power and the sound of those Page and Crows, I think. The Hot Song for Nowhere is a good song off that one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it ain't bad.
Yeah. Well, you know what, guys? Let's go from the stage to the diamond here for the latter part of the episode and talk about baseball in 1976. Looking back at the 70s, you really had, your dominant franchises. You know what I mean? There were only, a handful of teams kind of ruled the 70s. The A's, the early part of the decade, kind of the Reds in the middle, and then, I guess the Pirates near the Yankees and the Pirates.
Yeah.
Yankees and the Pirates near the end. The Pirates kind of showed up a few times in the early 70s too, I think. So there wasn't a lot of parity in baseball really in the 70s, to my knowledge. I'm looking at all the division winners here, and it was a lot of the same teams over and over. But Levi, you looked into the National League a little bit.
Oh, no, I looked into the National League.
Or you actually looked into the National League, and it was, it's like the Reds and the Phillies both won over 100 games. Right?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know when's the last time that happened. Granted, we have 3 divisions now, but
yeah.
Right. I can't think of another time that we've had 2 100-game winners.
Yeah, in the same division.
Yeah,
it was good stuff.
Yeah, the Montreal Expos suffered because of it, going 55 and 107.
Ouch.
Yeah. Baseball was new to Montreal still.
It was.
There was no baseball whatsoever in Montreal prior to that year.
So here's a crazy story that I learned just today, that Canada almost had a second team in 1976. In that in January, Labatt's, the beer company, agreed to buy the San Francisco Giants and have them play in Toronto in 1976. In 3 months, they were going to have them play in Toronto. And it wasn't until a month later that there was an injunction, and this guy stepped up and ended up paying, get this, $8 million for the San Francisco Giants to stay in San Francisco. It was wild because I guess
that pays for one Transformers arm in a movie right now. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
It's weird to think that the Giants wouldn't be, wouldn't have good attendance, and that they would, that they would be up for sale and potentially move. But it turned out that they had, since the A's moved into town from Kansas City, they were stealing, I won't say the stealing, but siphoning from the fan base. And obviously the A's early success in the 70s took a lot of that.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's weird to think that the Giants, the San Francisco Giants, came that close to not being anymore.
Yeah, one of the really vanguard teams, of right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
just think if the Blue Jays had won all those World Series the last few years.
Right. The Blue Jays came around the next year.
Right. Yeah, they still got a team. They did. Yeah.
Yep. They did.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is 76 is pre-Mariners and pre-Blue Jays.
Right. Yeah, because they were 77.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
So
tell me a little bit about the Rick Monday saving the flag thing.
So I think a lot of people know it on its periphery, which is these 2 guys run out, and you can see footage of this on YouTube. 2 guys run out at Dodger Stadium, I believe, and with a flag and hold it down on mid left field, and Rick Monday is playing center field, I believe.
Yeah. And
they're dousing the flag with lighter fluid, and they strike a match, and it doesn't light. And Rick Monday's running, and in a little documentary about it, he's thinking at first he's just going to bowl him over, but he realizes that they can't catch the flag on fire, because when idiots are running around, shit like that happens, and so he's just decides to go ahead and swoop it up, and it looks like the dude throws the lighter fluid canister at him.
Oh, wow.
If you look at the footage, it's weird. The dude chucks something, and it looks like, and something, it appears, falls at Monday's feet as he's running into the infield with this flag. Mm-hmm. Monday says he gets letters all the time about it, and obviously 76, is contentious.
Very fitting, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. And Rick Monday went on to hit 30-some home runs that year anyway. So he was raking.
Yeah.
But Mike Schmidt hit 12 home runs in his first 15 games that year. In the first 15 games of the year, including 4 against the Chicago Cubs, I believe.
Yeah. It's like the Mike Schmidt game.
Yeah. Dave Kingman also had a big game, I think, against the Cubs that year. And he hit
Chicago wasn't really a great place to be for 70s baseball. You know what I mean? Either side of town.
Drunk and taking your shirt off. It was time.
The White Sox were abysmal. They won 67 games or something like that in 1976.
A really interesting home run that year. Joe Niekro, the pitcher, Houston Astros pitcher, hit the only home run of his career off of his brother, Phil Niekro,
Phil.
to tie the game that they eventually won. So it was like a big home run that he hopefully held over him at family reunions.
Yeah.
But
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Real quick, just to touch round back to what we mentioned in the intro. Dodgers catcher Steve Yeager was in the on-deck circle during a game, and there was a broken bat at the plate, and splinters of it lodged into his esophagus. And it required 90 minutes of surgery. Like, he was probably, his life was at stake. And
that's crazy.
This happened just like randomly. As a result, since he was a catcher, he was obviously, when he came back to play, he was a little concerned about his throat. And so they invented that little drop-down flap that covers the throat. It was like a Dodgers bench coach invented that. That was eventually adopted by all catchers, pretty much, to protect the throat because of Steve Yeager.
We mentioned, obviously 76, the Reds, kind of dominate the conversation sometimes when people talk about that. And I was looking, it's rightfully so. I'm looking at the NL MVP voting for 1976. You've got a third of the Reds starting lineup that made it in the top 25 in voting.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what I think what really set Joe Morgan apart, on top of his his average and his home runs and his RBIs, was he stole 60 bases a year.
Right.
He earned that MVP.
Oh yeah, 5-tool, man.
Yeah.
And then you had George Foster tearing it up too. He
was
making.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is amazing about that is Morgan was the MVP, and he was one of 6 Reds to win the MVP in 8 years. Six Reds won the MVP 8 years in a row. Out of 8 years.
I can't imagine that's ever been equaled.
No, that seems like a statistic you got on your video game when you were a little kid or something.
Yeah. No kidding. I mean, they were so good. I mean, those piggyback on what Levi just said, and also revert back to what I said. Those guys I was mentioning, you got like 7 guys in your lineup hitting over 300. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
it's insane.
The Big Red Machine. That's a great name.
You could put that team up against just about anybody. It's kind of a cliche, but you really could.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they would have more Hall of Famers, except Pete Rose isn't allowed in.
And they had won it the year before too, right?
75. Yeah, that was what considered one of the best World Series of all time against the Red Sox.
Against the Red Sox,
the Carlton Fisk, Game 6.
Well, to switch over to the AL. I mean the Royals, were good. I mean, you guys in Kansas City. I mean, Brett led the league. He got he didn't win the MVP. That was Thurman Munson, but he won
the batting title.
Won the batting title, yeah, 333.
And McRae was just one point behind them, right? So.
Yeah, and McRae was right
dramatically
there as well.
so, right?
Yeah,
it came down to like the last game of the season. So I can't remember exactly.
Like last at bat.
In charges of racism, no? Against the Twins?
I didn't remember that from then, but I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah, it's a contentious batting title.
Yeah. You also had Amos Otis from the Royals that year, finishing high in the MVP voting as well. So good Royals team. Was that kind of the? I don't know. Were they good in 75 as well? Was that kind of the start of the Royals being pretty really competitive there for about 10 years or so? 76, right around there, probably.
Yeah, that's the period. The next 3 years they made it to the championship. So and lost to the Yankees all 3 years. So,
right.
But
that was kind of the beginning of the golden era of the Royals, certainly.
Which is remarkable to think, because they started in '69, right?
Right, correct.
And here they are 8 years later, and they're perennial contenders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It didn't take long to get off the ground. Kind of one of probably the more interesting stories from 76 in the AL is, the bird is the word.
Fidrych.
Mark Fidrych, yeah. 19-9 his rookie year. Almost wins the Cy Young. So yeah, it was that. I think that's that's probably one of baseball's more interesting stories from that year.
I think he started the All-Star game too.
He did.
You can find that online. It's fun to watch him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, he was fun. And I mean, it's an unfortunate story in the sense that he wasn't able to sustain that success. But yeah, he certainly made things fun for Tigers fans that year and all of baseball too. Also, there was a really big fight. I mentioned this earlier, but you can pull it up on YouTube. We'll post a link to it. Probably one of baseball's bigger brawls was on May 20th, 1976, when the Yankees and the Red Sox and Lou Piniella ran just bulldozed through Fisk at home plate, and it just started a series of brawls that almost never seemed to end. So definitely check that out if you get a chance as well. And then John had mentioned the Oakland fire sale in 76. The A's had those years of dominance, in the early 70s. What, the A's won like 3 in a row? Yeah, 72, 73, and 74. Yeah. But then, they just decided they want to get rid of the whole team, just selling all the contracts. So you had Vida Blue, Don Baylor,
Raleigh Fingers.
Yeah, Fingers, right. And of course, tried to contact Bill Veeck of the White Sox as well. And then, finally, as Jonathan mentioned, that it was, the moves were voided. The A's ended up still actually almost making the playoffs that year too.
Yeah, they were just like 2 or 3 games back behind the Royals, I think.
Yeah, right. So despite all that turmoil, they still put together a pretty competitive season. So that's pretty crazy. And those, the 2 National League teams, even though the Royals had a good squad that year, and the National League teams were just the Phillies and the particularly the Reds were just so good.
Well, yeah, and I mean the playoffs, they're kind of short and sweet that year, to be honest. Mm-hmm. The ALCS, everybody I guess knows if you're a Yankees fan about the Chris Chambliss walk-off homer.
Right.
And not so important is the fact that he hit a home run. It's that there's literally zero security at Yankee Field. Like, as soon as the ball's not even in the stands, and half the stadium is, on the field.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know if he gets to touch third or home. Like, finally he gets, maybe in between third and home, and he just, kind of breaks through, shoving people into the dugout. and if you watch the YouTube video, we'll post it with one of our clips, and it's just amazing. It's just chaos, utter chaos.
Yeah, you don't see that now. You know what I mean? Just security would just be all over it.
Well, people they'd be breaking out guns and pointing
tear gas. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's literally madness. It's so crazy. And one of the
New York was a dangerous place in the 70s.
Oh yeah, well, and so to go from that high to then just getting swept in the World Series had to be something. One of the things I think was so neat is the 76 Reds were the only team to ever sweep all the brackets of a playoff system.
Wow.
Yeah.
And during the World Series, this goes to show how good the Reds were. During the World Series, which was only 4 games, but they made 0 substitutions, offense or defense.
No kidding.
Crazy.
Oh, they only made pitching changes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how rock
from another
solid
cloth,
they were.
man.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So yeah, they just they were destined to win that World Series, basically.
Yeah. Wow. I need to look back, Levi, on the Reds topic. Cincinnati, kind of a smaller market, smaller city. I mean, compared to a lot of the major sports markets, had been a pretty exciting time, for that town.
Oh, yeah,
just to be the toast of sports for a few years in a market that aside from the 1990 Reds, hasn't really had much success since then. You can't count on the Bengals. All right, so
at the same time, it
past
was
the first round of the playoffs at least. Anyway,
it was kind of a long time coming because the Reds were successful in the early 90s. But they just could, or I'm sorry, in the early 70s, but they just couldn't break through. They were successful in the early 90s as well, but but in the early 70s, but yeah, they just didn't break through. And then, so those two World Series were a long time coming in a sense, I guess. But yeah, it's got to be one of the most dominant teams for one of the smallest markets.
Oh yeah.
They had a TV show, WKRP. Right? Things were looking pretty good for them.
Things were looking pretty good for Cincy. Yeah, like I might have invested in some real estate in the early '80s in Cincy or something, right?
Right.
The one big thing. It's just amazing to think how. Just sweeping everybody to me. That seems like. It's got to instantly put them as, if not the best team of all time, as like one of the top 3 or 4 or 5 baseball teams of all time, the 76 Reds.
I think they'd have to be. You'd have Yankees fans probably arguing.
Yeah, well, they pissed the Yankees off so much that they won the World Series the next 2 years.
Yeah, right.
yeah. And apparently it was charged that the Yankees were stealing signs via the broadcast in the first game. And they still couldn't win. The Yankees held the lead for all of 2 innings, I think, that series.
Yeah.
But they dominated. It was an afterthought that they would win.
Yeah. I would have enjoyed some kind of like Super Bowl shuffle video from them.
You would have
like funky.
Like Joe Morgan and Pete Rose, like.
We've got actually
no Pete.
I don't know if you guys knew this or not, but Joe Morgan's actually on one of those Return to Forever records. This isn't widely known. Okay,
Joe Morgan played some percussion on George Benson's "Breezin'" that
year. Oh man, Breezin's a guilty pleasure here, man. Anyway, well, fun times, guys. Good conversation. We'd like to thank our friend John White for hanging out with us tonight.
Thank you, John.
Thanks so much, John.
Thank you very much for having me on. I had a great time.
Excellent. Thank you for all the good music recommendations as well. Everybody, if you want to learn more about rock and roll Shin-Soo Choo, check out rockchew.com. You can find previous episodes, links to cool things we've discussed. Just really everything in the whole rock and roll Shin-Soo Choo universe you can find at rockchew.com. Also, please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at rockinchew. That's rockinchew. In as in, gosh, I didn't have one for tonight.
Nobody's
Nefi Perez, he played for the Reds, right? Anyway, sorry guys, the best I can do. Sorry about that, forgot. But anyway, at rockinchew. Rockinchew on Twitter and Instagram. Like us on Facebook, and then also please, if you could, go to iTunes and tell us what you think of the podcast and subscribe to it. That certainly would help us out and spread the word. So again, rockchew.com, and until next time, we'll see everybody later. Take care.
Peace.
Good night.